welcome you to the EGROW Foundation Friday webinar series, a series which we generally do post-lunch on a Friday. We started this series about a month when we were into COVID and realized there's going to be lockdowns and closure of business, and obviously to some extent research could get impacted. As you know, EGROW Foundation is a research-based policy think tank incorporated in October 2018 with the objective of providing research-based policy advice to the government and other stakeholders. We have in our mind, of course, we are too young as of now, but we have in our mind to become the NBER of our part of our region in the world, training people, raising the standards of economic education, and participating actively in global debates. We have been very fortunate. We have had 3 Nobel laureates come and speak to us. We are now trying for one of the 3 who have done lots of work on institutions and won the Nobel Prize for 2024, and I'm sure we'll succeed. We have had about 250 webinars. Under the G20, where India was the president, we did a series of 11 lectures on new international economic order, where of course the World Bank, IMF also play a role. And I myself worked in the IMF, so I know that the series on new international economic order was very well in right space. We discussed the report which Larry Summers and N.K. Singh has come out on multilateralism. We did series on women empowerment, and we also did a series on climate finance. In these 250 webinars which we have done so far, we have been very successful in bringing a blend of foreign scholars and Indian scholars, discuss about global economic issues and those pertaining to India and some of those pertaining to emerging countries. Today it is in that very context that as Ayhan came out with his report, we jumped onto it and requested him, such an important report. When I read through it, I was so thrilled. And then there are things which we as an emerging country need to really think through this. And I thought it had lots of policy ramifications for us. So I invited Ayhan, and I'm very fortunate, despite his super busy schedule and traveling programs, he agreed to come and speak to us. So before without wasting too much of your time, let me briefly introduce my dear friend Ayhan Kose and his colleague Amat, who are going to do the presentation. And then let's go straight on to the presentation. While we are entering the night, I know you are entering the work time. So both of us at each end of the globe are into some important activity after this. Actually, Ayhan Kose doesn't need an introduction. He has come out with such excellent reports in the last few years, but just a brief mention about him. He's the Deputy Chief Economist of the World Bank Group and Director of the Prospects Group. The type of studies which you are bringing out are mind-boggling. He is a member of the Chief Economist leadership team overseeing the bank's analytical work and policy and operational advice. He also leads the bank's work on the global macroeconomic outlook, financial flows and commodity markets, and under his management, the Prospects Group produces the bank's flagship reports, Global Economic Prospects and Commodity Markets Outlook, in addition to other policy and analytical publications. Prior to joining the World Bank, and that is where I met Ayhan and we became great friends, he was assistant to the director of the research department and deputy chief of the multilateral surveillance division in the IMF. He served in a wide range of roles supporting IMF's analytical policy and operational work. He writes extensively, as you know. Amat is joining him today in making the presentation. Amat is a senior economist with the World Bank's Prospects Group. His research focuses on macroeconomics, international trade and finance. He leads a research agenda on investments and contributes to the flagship Global Economic Prospects report. His recent journal publications include studies on integration, macro-financial stability, capital flows, and global value chains. As I understand, you are now going to be working on employment issues, and I think they're so very important now for the world as it enters the AI and ML environment. So with this, over to you, Ayhan, for your presentation.
Thank you, Sharan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We circulated this announcement, the seminar announcement within the bank, and I very much appreciate Sharan and EGROW Foundation inviting us to talk about public investment, a critical topic as we spend more and more time how to promote stronger growth supported by intelligent investment projects. So uh, let me quickly tell you what we plan to do, Amat and I. Next slide, Amat. So we are going to just quickly focus on 4 questions. Sharan asked me to talk about a little bit the near-term prospects for the global economy. We are going to tell you what the near-term prospects are. And there, really, we are expecting steady growth after multiple years of volatility and crisis we have seen, starting with the pandemic. But this growth will be lower than the average growth we have seen in the previous decade. And we think that risks still tilted to the downside, but there are few upside risks that are present. Then we are going to talk about how has public investment evolved in emerging developing economies. There has been a decline relative to the decade 2000-2009, and that decline was indeed significant, from 10% to 5%. And it has been broad-based. Given the large infrastructure needs, this is a huge challenge, and I will show you the aggregate investment growth rates as well. Then we are going to ask the following question: what is the impact of public investment on output and private investment? Obviously, this is a very, controversial question. People have different views depending on their political thinking. But here, we undertook an empirical exercise, and we are showing that under certain conditions, there is significant impact associated with public investment on economic growth as well as private investment. And finally, we are going to ask if public investment is good under certain conditions, what policies emerging market developing economy governments should employ to basically take advantage of the benefits of public investment. And there we have specific messages in the context of expansion of fiscal space, efficiency, increasing the efficiency of public investment, and having more enhanced global support, which we call the 3 E's of policy priorities when it comes to public investment. I'm happy that this 3 E's rhyme with EGROW Foundation's E's as well. So here, the acronym that's important for us to remind you is EMDs, Emerging Market and Developing Economies. There's also the LICs, Low-Income Countries. So let's move to the next slide very quickly. So I'm going to go over this part to motivate what are the near-term prospects for the global economy. As I mentioned, growth is stabilizing, but at a weaker level. Global growth this year is going to be around 2.6%. It will edge up a little bit next year with the policy easing supporting activity in both advanced economies and emerging market developing economies. The important point is that this growth remains tepid relative to the average pace of global growth over the decade, the pre-pandemic decade, 2010-2019. Growth in advanced economies will pick up this year, mainly because of the growth in the United States, and as well as a little bit of growth in the euro area. We think that the growth next year will move closer in advanced economies to their potential growth rates, in part reflecting the gradual easing of monetary policy. And all in all, this forecast obviously projects a soft landing in the global economy as well as in advanced economies. In the euro area as well, we are expecting growth to accelerate with the monetary policy easing alongside improvements in investment and hopefully trade as well. In emerging market developing economies, aggregate growth is forecast to slow a little bit to this year and next year around 4%. And this is obviously quite slower than the 2010-19 average. This slowdown is largely because of China, where growth is set to moderate this year and ease further next year, reflecting broad-based domestic weakness and a continued structural slowdown. When you exclude China from the emerging market developing economy group, in fact, we are expecting growth to accelerate from this year to the next year, from around 3.5% to 3.9%. So, next slide. Now, what are the risks we see, and what are the kind of the upside surprises we might see in the global economy? Risks to the outlook are tilted to the downside, primarily because of escalating conflicts and geopolitical tensions, even though there are some upside risks, and we would like to talk about this as well. An intensification of the conflict in the Middle East represents the major downside risks. Any prolonged escalation of the conflict, of course, could have implications for energy production, given the importance of the region, and that could, of course, translate into higher energy prices with implications for inflation. Heightened policy uncertainty and the possibility of adverse economic policy shifts, including regarding fiscal and trade policy in advanced economies, could weigh on growth prospects. Further trade fragmentation could result in more trade barriers and dampen activity, particularly in export-oriented emerging market and developing economies. We are also worried about higher for longer interest rates in an environment we see quite a bit of stickiness in core inflation, even though overall we are expecting inflation to continue coming down, the headline inflation. And of course, under the shadow of climate change, we are worried about more frequent natural disasters and consequences of these for output and activity. Now, two important upside risks. One could be if inflation comes down faster than what we are expecting, that will help central banks to accelerate monetary policy easing with, of course, positive impact on activity. There's also the possibility of stronger than expected growth in the United States, especially, and given the US economy surprised on the upside during the past 2 years, that could happen again. And of course, stronger than expected growth in China if there are further policy measures. Next slide. Now, what is the big issue here, given that we have this growth prospects in general weaker than what the global economy, advanced economies, emerging market developing countries deliver in the previous decade, and basically in general the weaker expectations of potential growth. One quick basic solution is accelerate investment. And there are good reasons for that, because there are significant investment needs, especially when it comes to infrastructure, especially when it comes to climate change. As you see on the slide on the left, in low-income countries, investment needs for a resilient and low carbon pathway is around 8% of GDP per year, as long as the eye can see. And these numbers, of course, translate into billions, if not trillions, when you think about different country groups or the global economy. even if you focus on capital and maintenance needs when it comes to infrastructure related to sustainable development goals, depending on the region you look at, the needs are sizable. And in, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa, it's close to 10%. In Latin America, it's close to 4.5%. And access to infrastructure is still a challenge in emerging developing economies as well as low-income countries. So what we established is that there are very large investment needs. Let's move to the next slide to see what is going on with investment growth. So when it comes to investment growth, we have very large investment needs, but investment growth has been slowing around the world as well as in emerging market developing economies. This slowdown is not just about China. Even if you exclude China from the sample, as you see from these two figures, whether you look at investment growth, the aggregate number, whether you look at private investment growth, there has been a sharp slowdown relative to what we had in the first decade of this millennium, then the second decade, the 2010-2022. So the big challenge is that how we can accelerate investment growth to improve the long-term growth prospects. So in the latest Global Economic Prospects report, we examined if public investment can be effective policy lever to help address infrastructure gaps, reignite economic growth, and crowd in private investment. I'm very happy. I'm here with Amat, who led this chapter, and he's going to take over the presentation now. Amat?
Thank you, Ayhan. Many thanks to Sharon, to EGROW Foundation. It's a pleasure to present our results here. As Ayhan noted, on the one hand, investment gaps in emerging market developing economies, EMDs, are large, but on the other hand, private investment has been weak in the past decade. So in these circumstances, the relevant policy question is whether public investment can be a feasible policy tool to help address these infrastructure gaps and boost economic growth, crowd in private investment. This is also an important topic, given that the empirical literature has been reporting rather mixed evidence, and the wide range of estimates of public investment multipliers the output effects of public investment. Empirical analysis specifically focusing on emerging market developing economies has been also especially lacking. So we try to contribute to the literature to fill this gap. But first, let us look at the key stylized facts about public investment in the context of developing countries. So as you can see in these charts, public investment tends to play an important role in emerging market developing economies. Government investment amounts to over a quarter of total investment in EMDs on average, and even more in low-income countries. As a share of GDP, public investment reaches almost 7% in EMDs, and that is almost twice as much as in advanced economies. Now, this is not surprising, given that the private sector in developing economies is generally weaker compared to advanced economies. Their financial markets are not as deep. There are institutional challenges and structural bottlenecks to private investment. At the same time, as mentioned, large-scale infrastructure, there are large infrastructure needs, and large infrastructure projects often require substantial upfront costs, at times without necessarily generating quick revenue streams, which makes them less feasible and more risky for private investors. So in this regard, the EMDs, emerging market developing economies, tend to rely relatively more on the public sector to deliver this necessary infrastructure. That said, public investment growth has also slowed down substantially in the past decade. If you look at this slide, in the 1990s, public investment in emerging market developing economies was growing at a much higher pace relative to advanced economies, to a large extent on account of robust growth in China. This public investment boom continued in the 2000s when general macroeconomic stability and rapid economic integration were complemented by rising commodity prices. This resulted in accelerated public investment growth, especially in commodity exporting emerging market developing economies, as you can see here in the center panel. However, after the global financial crisis, the dynamics changed quite dramatically. Multiple factors such as growth slowdown, elevated debt levels, collapse in commodity prices resulted in a major decline in public investment. Average annual public investment growth in EMDs dropped from annual growth of about 10% in the 2000s to 5% in the 2010s, at half. And that is it has reached essentially the lowest average pace over the past 3 decades. And of course, the COVID recession contributed to the weakness in public investment as well. More generally, event studies that we conducted in the context of this analysis, shown here at the right panel, these event studies indicate that recessions tend to have a very adverse and entrenched effects on public investment. In recessions, public investment contracts by about 4% on average. This is also quite unfortunate, as it is during recessions that public investment tends to have greater stimulus effects on output, as the literature suggests and as our analysis in this chapter also finds. So this leads me to the next question, the macroeconomic impacts of public investment. In principle, one can expect the effects of public investment on output to occur through various channels that are listed here. Importantly, in addition to the short-run demand side effects, public investment can increase productive capacity of an economy and lead to long-run supply side effects, boosting potential output. A part of this effect may also occur through crowding in of private investment, although I should say that the literature in this regard has been mixed. Some studies suggest that they might be crowding out effects instead. The macroeconomic effects of public investment are also likely to be influenced by the efficiency or quality of public investment. Not every dollar of public investment spending results in an equivalent increase in productive public capital stock, as some of the money is lost because of inefficiencies, corruption, poor planning and implementation of investment projects. In the worst cases, such investment may result in so-called white elephant projects that generate low or even no return, but at the same time are costly to maintain going forward. So the interplay between these various channels may result in rather different net macroeconomic impacts, which we explore next, focusing specifically on emerging market developing economies. I will avoid the technical discussion of the estimation framework and let's go straight to the key results. But in brief, we use local projections framework and estimate responses of real output to public investment shocks, which to this end we use a new methodology to identify public investment shocks as large changes in cyclically adjusted real public investment. The details are available in the chapter and the background study. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have at the end of the presentation, and this related to the technical aspects. The impulse responses, we also scale the impulse responses to show the effects of positive public investment shocks equivalent to 1% of GDP at the horizon of up to 5 years. The left panel here shows that on average in EMDs, scaling up of public investment by 1% of GDP leads to a positive and statistically significant increase in output by over 1%, by about 1.1% in the medium run over 5 years. The effects are smaller in the short run, but increase over the long term as supply side effects on productivity and productive capacity fully manifest themselves, which is consistent with our expectations and with the literature. At the same time, the positive effects of public investment can be even larger in countries with ample fiscal space and higher public investment efficiency. This you can see here on the right panel. Estimation of state-dependent multipliers conditional on the efficiency of public investment or public debt to GDP ratio, which we use to gauge the fiscal space. These estimations suggest that in countries with efficient public investment and low debt sustainability concerns, output may increase by up to 1.6% over the horizon of 5 years after a public investment shock. By contrast, in countries with low efficiency and limited fiscal space, the output effects are lower and in fact not statistically significant from zero. So as noted, these results are intuitive. As regulatory bottlenecks in efficiency of public investment project management may lead to a loss of fiscal resources and lower productivity of public capital. As regards fiscal space, additional public spending in countries with weak fiscal positions may lead to greater tax burdens for the private sector with possible anticipation effects, like the Ricardo channel. Also, there could be effects through the interest rate channel, because scaling up of government expenditures in countries with higher levels of debt may lead to greater sovereign risks, increasing borrowing costs for the private sector. Another important result that we have is that public investment also tends to crowd in private investment. As can be seen here on the left panel, the effect is not immediate. In fact, in the short term, there might be some crowding out effect, but it's not statistically significant. But in the medium run, a positive public investment shock may increase private investment by over 2% at the horizon of 5 years. This result is consistent with the recent literature. It is intuitive also. Public investment enables infrastructure that can encourage private investment and raise private capital returns. For instance, roads and communications infrastructure. In addition, public investment helps to reduce uncertainty and risks associated with large private investment projects, especially infrastructure projects with massive upfront costs, but longer payback periods. And public investment, of course, can crowd in private investment directly through public-private partnerships. The analysis also suggests that public investment leads to productivity gains and in general facilitates potential output growth. In response to public investment shocks equivalent to 1% of GDP, our estimates suggest that public potential output can increase in the medium run over 5 years by about 1%, which is shown here on the right panel. These results thus underscore the importance of public investment operating through both short-run demand side effects and long-run supply side effects. We also find that during recessions, public investment multipliers tend to be greater in comparison with periods of economic expansion, as I noted earlier. This is also in line with the literature that finds greater impact of government spending more generally during recessions. But we extend this empirical evidence to specifically to public investment and to the case of emerging market and developing economies. So in light of these findings, what are the policy priorities in EMDs? Specific policy interventions to increase public investment and to maximize its positive macroeconomic effects, of course, depend on individual country characteristics. But there are three universal policy interventions that emerge as critical priorities applicable to all emerging market and developing economies, which we call the 3 E's of policy priorities that Ayhan mentioned. So, and in implementing these policy priorities, EMDs face significant challenges. Many developing countries suffer from weaknesses in mobilizing fiscal revenues, which are critical for securing fiscal space and delivering the needed investment. Tax collection administration capacity in EMDs is generally more limited than in advanced economies. As you can see here, for instance, in the left panel, EMDs tend to lag advanced economies in terms of the size of government tax revenues relative to GDP. Government debt to GDP also escalated significantly over the last years to over 60% of GDP, which is about 20 percentage points higher than the average over the previous 2 decades, as you can see here in the center panel. As a result, borrowing costs increased sharply since the 2020s, as the inflation and interest rates increased globally. And when fiscal space is tight, also often the first line of defense in liquidity constrained EMDs is to cut or postpone public investment projects. And indeed, as the right chart here shows, EMDs with higher interest payments tend to have a lower public investment to GDP ratios. Now, as regards efficiency of public investment, emerging market and developing economies, especially low-income countries, generally lag advanced economies, as you can see here in these figures. What is also alarming is that over the recent decades, in the average emerging market developing economy, there has been little progress in improving the quality of institutions that are critical for overall public investment efficiency, including, for instance, such dimensions as quality of regulation, governance, control of corruption that you can see here on the right panel. So to conclude, the 3 policy priorities to boost the benefits of public investment are: first, expansion of fiscal space. Emerging market and developing economies, as I mentioned, often have limited revenue mobilization capacity and scope to allocate fiscal resources to public investment. And therefore, they should undertake reforms to improve tax collection efficiency, enhance fiscal frameworks. These include debt management frameworks, medium-term expenditure frameworks, and other policy intervention to improve fiscal governance, fiscal frameworks. In addition, to boost fiscal space, policymakers in EMDs should consider curtailing unproductive spending, for instance, distortive subsidies. The second policy priority for emerging market developing economies focuses on the efficiency, on improving efficiency of public investment. At the macro level, this means reforms to tackle corruption, poor governance, and limited capacity of fiscal administration. At the micro level, investment project level, this means reforms to improve all aspects of public investment management process. the design of projects, cost-benefit planning, appraisal and procurement procedures, project implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of public investment projects. In this regard, the World Bank and the IMF have developed public investment management frameworks that discuss extensively these various dimensions of public investment management and consolidate the global best practices. These policies can also be complemented by initiatives to prioritize public investment projects with the greatest potential to mobilize private investment and to spark productivity gains. For instance, such projects as investment projects focusing on human capital development, communications and transport infrastructure networks, projects focusing on renewable energy infrastructure. That said, for developing countries with limited fiscal space and deep structural challenges, and here we are talking specifically about most vulnerable countries, low-income countries. For these countries, it's very difficult to implement all these wide-ranging reforms by themselves, and they need substantial external support. Both financial support and technical support are critical. Financial support is needed not just to expand fiscal space, to enable, in principle, public investment and to maximize its macroeconomic effects, but also to address the infrastructure gaps and to fund the comprehensive, wide-ranging reforms critical for ensuring the efficiency of public investment that I mentioned earlier. Coordinated technical assistance is also imperative to ensure that this financial assistance, the funds are used effectively and efficiently. This is especially critical nowadays in light of the challenging macroeconomic conditions, emerging risks, growing urgency of investment needs to tackle climate change, to stimulate green transition, and to make progress toward sustainable development goals. Let me stop here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I think we are ready to take questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both of you, for first introducing the topic, Ayhan, and then Amat going in details. Thank you very much. Of course, you see quite a few questions in the chat box. And if anybody wants to ask a question and wants to raise their hand, more than happy to look up and invite them. If there are people who want to raise their hand and ask a question, we could do that. I had a quick question for both of you. You know that in many countries, and of course you have mentioned it, that the fiscal space is very limited, that the tax to GDP ratio, despite the reforms that have happened in a country like ours, continues to be 17% of GDP. We did many things to change that. We also demonetized, thinking that it could be corruption and unaccounted money, but we could not raise it. We are lucky in that sense that we are in a good fiscal spot. Our debt to GDP ratio is still around 80. Our deficit is on the glide path. So then the issue is, how do these countries who are caught in a trap where they cannot enhance the tax to GDP ratio, what would they do? That's one. And of course, the question comes from the other one. Given the research that you have done, do you think textbook analysis would generally be a crowding out? But you have brought in the concept, and this has been discussed earlier also, the crowding in. And from the tables and graphs that you have presented, to me it seems crowding in is something which you are witnessing now, especially after COVID. So would that be the right conclusion? And if that's the right conclusion, then if crowding in is taking place, how do I improve the revenue of the government so that I can go in for more public investment? And in case somebody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. And in the chat box, Ayhan and Amat, I would request you to have a look and see if you want to respond to any of the questions in the chat box. Some of the questions I thought were very interesting in the chat box.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharan. And let me basically answer some of your questions, and then Amat will also provide insight. So I think, Sharan, when you were in the IMF, you were thinking about these issues, what to do with the expansion of fiscal space. How can we expand the fiscal space in an environment it is really difficult to expand the revenue base? Now, the challenge most of the time when we want these countries to undertake, of course, fiscal reforms, they need to think about the revenue as well as the expenditure side. I think on the revenue side, I have a difficulty in accepting the premise that we exhausted. I mean, this depends on the country. The space when it comes to government revenues in emerging developing economies. And the fundamental reason for that, Sharan, is still we see very, very large informal sector in these countries. And depending on the country, the size of that sector, in some cases even larger than the formal sector. So we need to find a way to have this transition of these informal entities to become formal. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do, and I'm not saying that can be done in a short time period. And I'm not saying it would be pain-free. It will involve some pain. And there's a reason why we don't see, political will to push the formalization of informal sector in many countries. But as our presentation documented, the revenue ratios around 25%, and despite all the attempts on the part of revenue mobilization, these numbers haven't been moving up in a meaningful way. Now, on the expenditure side as well, I think there are significant inefficiencies when we think about the public sector, especially lower income countries. They can improve the public sector efficiency and get better returns to investment when it comes to functioning of the public sector. Now, these things will take time. What needs to be done, of course, in the medium term is to show a serious, credible fiscal plan. Now, when I say a serious, credible fiscal plan, Sharan, that has at least two dimensions. One dimension, your plans are not, about your dreams. Your plans are feasible, and you have the kind of the clear idea. Even if you are investing on the public side, expanding quite a bit, you know how to, in a sense, recover from that expansionary period. So there is nothing wrong accumulating debt. There is nothing wrong having public investment, as long as you do these things in a well-defined feasible, robust fiscal framework. That's number one. Number two, and I think that's the kind of the very serious issue. We need to have credibility on the part of fiscal authorities. And that credibility comes with a record of running disciplined fiscal policy. And I think that combination of the two could lead to very large dividends. In fact, in a different context, we looked at under what conditions you have investment accelerations. And the fiscal reform, fiscal prudency is a critical component of triggering an investment acceleration. And that investment acceleration happens in the context of public as well as private investment. Now, very quickly, there was a question about economic growth. What happened to economic growth? Let me make sure. Gerard Schind asked that question. When we say growth has reduced, what is the benchmark compared to what it has gone down? Is there a year up to which it has to keep going up? So I think this is a very relevant question. And Sharon, you have been to many board meetings. The different countries have different views about economic growth. Some think that they have grown enough. They don't need more growth, and they don't want others to grow either. And some countries, they would like to grow more. But the important point is the following. And I invite everyone interested in look at our potential growth database. It's publicly available. So when we look at an economy's growth outcomes, we always think about relative to its potential. A country growing 3%, you might say, oh, this is a good number. But if the country's potential is 4.5%, we say, hold on, this country has untapped potential. There is slack in the economy. Growth should be faster. So what we have seen over the past 2.5 decades, potential growth around the world in advanced economies, in emerging developing economies, coming down. And when you think about productivity growth slowing, investment growth slowing, and in many countries, we have a huge problem when it comes to working age population growth, especially in advanced economies, we have the fundamental drivers of growth weakening. So, and we think that trend will continue. That's why we have this work program on investment. Finally, your question, Sharon, is crowding possible? Yes, crowding possible. And let me basically give a very quick, very simple example. Think of a country with certain parts of country still do not have the type of roads, type of infrastructure that's necessary to have, uninterrupted commerce. When you lay that infrastructure, obviously you will bring private businesses. You will generate private investment along with that. So most of the time, the challenge we see in these countries, public investment projects might have political motivations, not necessarily economic motivations. Even projects with economic motivations might not run efficiently. That's why we talk about efficiency of public investment. I think that given the type of demands we see, especially in Africa, for infrastructure and the kind of the growing populations, public investment could be a potent policy tool. We are not saying public investment is the answer, is the medication to all of the problems. And obviously, you need to have huge private investment, right? But public investment can be helpful. Let me turn to Amat. Amat, take it over.
Yes, thank you very much for the questions, and to complement the responses by Ayhan, say that public investment on average, we find that public investment can be conducive to promoting output growth, including potential output growth in the long run, including through the effects on private investment, private capital mobilization, and crowding in on private investment. But that said, the effect is highly conditional on the availability of fiscal space and efficiency of public investment. In fact, if public investment is inefficient, the macroeconomic impacts, net macroeconomic impacts, may be detrimental as regards economic growth, crowding in of private investment, and also crowding in of foreign direct investment. Right? There was a question on this relationship between public investment and private investment, or FDI, in the chat. And India has been, in fact, relying quite heavily in terms of growth drivers on public investment recently. As you know, there are large-scale infrastructure projects, public infrastructure projects. And in terms of FDI inflows, India has been among the top 3 countries receiving total recipient of net FDI inflows among emerging market and developing economies. Public investment can crowding in private investment through, or directly through public-private partnerships, for instance. But the evidence suggests that the incidence of private participation in infrastructure, PPP, in the recent decades, the number of PPP projects, PPI projects, has been declining. And PPP in general can be an effective tool only when public investment is efficient. And otherwise, it may lead to draining of fiscal resources. The indirect channels of public investment, crowding in private investment, as I mentioned, public investment can enable the necessary infrastructure to reduce the cost, to enable private economic activity, and to reduce the costs of private investment. There could also be demonstration effects, right, for some frontier investment projects, that projects related to green transition, for instance. Public investment can reduce the risks, the cost of first movers. Okay. Demonstration effects can provide guidelines to private investors for certain investment projects. There are a few questions also in the chat related to measuring efficiency of public investment. How do we measure the tools for analyzing or measuring public investment efficiency? How to measure efficiency of public investment? Here in this analysis, we use several measures of public investment efficiency. In the baseline analysis, we use public infrastructure efficiency index developed by the IMF. It's the public infrastructure efficiency measure based on data development analysis that is used in the Fiscal Monitor database. In addition to that, we carry out a range of robustness checks with alternative public investment efficiency measures, including the measure developed by our World Bank colleagues, Devadas and Penning's 2018 paper. In that paper, the public investment efficiency measure is constructed as the weighted average of the portion of infrastructure, of efficient infrastructure types for various types of infrastructure, like electricity, transmission, water infrastructure, paved roads, etc. In addition, we use the Dublin Norris Public Investment Management Efficiency Index as another robustness checks, and that index is probably most widely known in the literature. It's based on the surveys. It's a cross-sectional index. Sorry. Based on surveys of the effectiveness of various stages of public investment management process, from implementation to monitoring of public investment projects. And of course, the literature also uses various proxies of public investment efficiency, institutional measures, regulatory quality, bureaucratic quality, control of corruption. In our case, we use CPIA indices of institutional quality, regulatory quality, as well as ICRT, International Country Risk Guide indices of institutional quality, the dimensions of institutional quality that are most relevant for public investment efficiency.
Sir, I have a doubt here. May I?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
If Amat has finished what he wants to say, then Chitra, you could go ahead. Amat, have you finished? Or
Yes,
you want
maybe
to...
one last remark that
Okay.
I want to mention this as regards the impact, the transmission channels of public investment efficiency. Recent research that I carried out with Hugo Panizza also shows that public investment efficiency has important implications for sovereign risk and debt sustainability. More specifically, scaling up of public investment when the quality of public investment is low may lead to detrimental effects, may increase sovereign risk and lead to unsustainable debt issues, and vice versa for scaling up of public investment when public investment quality is high. So there is also this link from the public investment quality or efficiency and sovereign risk and debt sustainability implications. Yes, please.
Chitra, go ahead.
Yeah.
Please be brief.
Yeah,
Because they have yet to start their day at the World Bank. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just be brief. Yeah, please go ahead.
My question is that if there is increase in investment, we say that there is manifold effect on the output. This is the concept of multiplier. Right. So if we compare the magnitude of multiplier of public investment and private investment, sir, what is your finding that whether the impact of private investment is more or public investment is more?
On average, just to summarize, as a brief recap, we find that on average in EMDs, scaling up of public investment by 1% of GDP leads to about 1.1, 1.2% of increase in the level of output over the horizon of 5 years. In the case of the crowding in effect of public investment on private investment, we find that equivalent public investment shock, 1% of GDP, public investment shock equivalent to 1% of GDP can lead to increase in private investment, real private investment of up to 2.2% over the horizon of 5 years. So that's a significant crowding in effect. As regards, I'm not sure if the question was also about the private investment impact on economic growth. This is something that we do not analyze directly in the chapter. It focuses just on the public investment multipliers and also in macroeconomic impacts to specific channels, productivity, private investment, crowding, inflation, etc. Does it answer your question?
Chitra, any supplementary question? I think he's very clear that they have not attempted the private
sir,
sector
absolutely.
multiplier effect, but the public sector they have, and that's the data that he's sharing with us.
Absolutely, sir. Got it. Thank you.
I think it's 7:30 here, so I know the time there is also going up. I want to thank both of you profusely, and I totally agree with your observations that you made, and I really liked the way you analyzed the informal sector and the public sector efficiency and the credibility fiscal plan, and which has two dimensions. Totally agree with you. Also agree with your observation. I've also held that position for a very long time in India. We have had a deficit on our government account since 79-80. And our debt to GDP ratio has generally been above 60%, which are the Maastricht Treaty benchmarks. But you know that we have grown from one orbit of growth to the other, and now amongst the fastest growing in the world. I also like the idea that you mentioned about the potential growth rates. We are growing at 7%, highest in the world. But my own personal belief is we in India have the capacity, given our demographic dividend at 10%, and given that female labor force participation is way below the average, and if we are able to enhance that, we can. So I'm going to look up the data on potential growth rates. Thank you for bringing it out. In India, I just want to close with one observation, and yeah, two. And your analysis reminded me of the paper by Domer in American Economic Review in 1944, talking about the quality of expenditure and then the deficit is manageable. So I really liked your observation, and going back to 80-year-old study, that's very impressive. The last point I want to make is, in India, we have experimented, and credit goes to the recent government. We have experimented despite COVID, we enhanced public expenditure and we reduced the revenue expenditure. So we enhanced infrastructure expenditure with the assumption that the multiplier is 2 or around 2. And we are seeing very good results. The sustenance of growth above 6.57% is because the investment by the government has increased tremendously, almost doubled in the last few years. So it's about 3.2% of GDP now. So we in the country have been congratulating the government that despite all odds and challenges, and despite global stimulus packages, they have come out with a very, very measured, conservative, but far-reaching, well-calculated fiscal strategy. So I must thank both of you for bringing such important policy issues to our notice. Totally agree on the informal sector, and we need to work on it. So I must thank the participants for raising those questions, and I am looking forward to your visit in 2025 to India. I'm also looking forward to your next report being released in January, and maybe I'll pester you to present that too, and hope you will oblige. So with that, let me thank you. I'm aware of the time, I'm aware of your office hours. So with that, if I have your permission, I'd like to close.
Thank you, Sharan. We really appreciate Amat and I for your kind invitation. I'm hoping that this can be a tradition. We will visit EGROW Foundation online or in person, or you can come and visit Washington, D.C. as you used to do. I look forward to that as well. But if I come to India, you will know it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And let me thank everyone who joined and asked many questions. Please check our webpage. We have extensive work on investment. I think we plan to, by the way, I forgot to mention, Sharan, Amat and another colleague, Haley Palan, have this wonderful study on foreign direct investment. And we are hoping to release that in the near future, looking at, trends, consequences, implications, all types of, issues related to FDI. And that has been a sore spot in the global economy. The FDI declined significantly, and there are serious questions about the future of FDI. So all in all, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon in one way or another.
Let me make a request right away. FDI is extremely important for India. I remember in my classes, Kenneth Rogoff at Harvard in 2004 January was teaching us about FDI, and I was saying it's the highest in India, and he pointed out, Charan, you're wrong. It's almost double in China than what it is in India. So we in India policymakers are dying to somehow have higher FDI. If whenever you're ready with your report, and if you're comfortable, the EGROW platform is available to you. We would be happy to host you on that study at even a short notice. It's so important for a country like India, so important for emerging markets, and we are dying for it. So we will be happy. And today's recording will be available on the website of EGROW by tomorrow noon. And I'm sure this such an important presentation is going to be used by all policymakers, academicians, and in the classes, business schools, because of the topic that we have discussed today. So it will be available tomorrow by noon on our website. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.